Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is Funeral Service Insider from Kates-Boylston. Each episode features conversations about emerging trends and news that affect the death care industry. We talk to people who understand the delicate balance of change in a profession and vocation steeped in tradition. This week, I am handing over the reins to editor of the American Cemetery and Cremation magazine, Tom Nondorf, and he is going to do the interview, and he's going to introduce the guest, and I am going to see you on the other side. But please stay with me for the postmortem after the end credits, where I'm going to talk about cemetery upkeep as the holiday season approaches. All right, let's get started.
Hello, this is Tom Nondorf of American Cemetery and Cremation magazine. I'm sitting in for the great Tony Russo today for our FSI podcast. Today I want to introduce you to Domenic Antinucci. He's program manager for the Brownyard Group. He heads their program. He founded their program specifically specializing in cemetery and crematory insurance. You know, as I travel around the great big land we have here, the two topics that people love to talk about the most are cemeteries and insurance. Okay, maybe not. People do love cemeteries. Insurance is often used by people as kind of a stand-in for a less than exciting topic. But if anyone can bring it to life and make it exciting for us, I'm confident it's Domenic Antinucci, who I now introduce to you. Domenic, hello.
Hello, Tom. Thank you for the introduction. I will try to keep it as exciting and interesting as possible.
Well, you can draft off the fact that you're not just any insurance, but you are cemetery insurance. So give me a little bit of the background about what the Brownyard Group specifically is doing in terms of insurance, because it's somewhat a new program that you launched, right? And we deal with a lot of other insurance companies in the death care space, but not so much ones that, and you had just written a piece for our magazine about things to look out, trips and falls kind of thing in the cemetery. So we'll talk about that. But tell me a little bit about just kind of what you guys are hoping to achieve in the space.
Yes. So in 2017, we partnered with a carrier and launched this specialty program, it's called. And when we speak insurance, it's property and casualty. You know, a lot of conferences I go to, it's more of the pre-care insurance. This is the standard insurance as you know it. We will cover the chapels, the offices, the auto fleet, the garage, any crime, any excess, inland marine, cyber, if you wish. So the typical insurance you know in your daily lives is what we cover for cemeteries and crematories. We started, and now we're doing funeral homes with that. And we launched this in 2017 because, as we could tell, and still today, this is what I can tell, there is not a carrier that specializes in 10 to 15 lines of coverage in just cemetery, crematory, and funeral home risks nationally. There are pockets of parts of the country where they had, but not nationally. So we partnered with a broker in New York, the Regan Agency, who work with a lot of cemeteries and do a lot of conferences there, have over 20 years experience themselves in the industry, to launch this program in New York and then nationally. And that's where we are at today. Is that
so one advantage, I guess, for a cemetery, if they're looking at insurance, they can get a carrier. In other words, a large carrier that's well known, but to get somebody that specializes in it, you guys are bringing kind of a different level of understanding. Is that correct?
That's right. So there is specific coverages we offer, and we have enhancement forms that broaden our coverage to differentiate ourselves from maybe just the lay insurance coverage. But some of that includes, debris and tree removal, for example. A lot of cemeteries, their flora and fauna is a big part of their atmosphere there. And some of their great, wonderful trees do come down in storms. And the cost to clean that up is significant. So we offer some good coverage there to sort of help them out when these incidents occur. It just has one example. Another part of it is the professional coverage, which is really fundamental in this program. And when I say fundamental, insurance in general, the foundational coverage for liability coverage requires bodily injury when people feel like they're damaged. Bodily injury means you broke your arm, you cut yourself, you bruised yourself. There has to be some tangible injury there. And that makes sense in our, society when someone's offended by they got the wrong service at a restaurant, that they're not going to be able to sue for bodily injury, and so on and so forth. At a restaurant, and many circumstances where maybe your feelings are hurt, but that's not part of the operations or the point of the industry. So you cannot get coverage for that. But in this industry, we are well aware that it's a very sensitive subject. There's a lot of empathy here. Part of the operations is making sure families have the right of sepulcher and burying their loved ones or cremating their loved ones in peace and with honor. So that's where our professional coverage comes into play. We will cover mental anguish in these circumstances for this industry because that's what it requires. That's where a lot of emotions run high and issues come to light, whether it's mistakes or errors and omissions by the cemetery, crematory, funeral home, or just something, the family was just really up in arms about, something that they didn't like happening.
That's interesting. We just had a webinar yesterday talking a lot about chain of custody for ashes, cremated remains, that is. And there's often stories in the news about this, a mistake. Somebody found, these weren't the right cremated remains of my uncle. Is this something that you're talking about that you guys actually help provide coverage for?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So we see this remains either mishandled or not handled to the expectations or standard of care of expected, and or burials. People buried in the wrong plots, found out years later, or double sold plots years later, and even circumstances where a casket isn't handled properly during a procession, and so on and so forth. COVID brought to light a lot that could go wrong in a cemetery that is overwhelmed or not ready to manage the unfortunate amount of deaths that occurred in that amount of time. And that would be the professional coverage would cover a lot of that. Another benefit is we are handling within our claims specialists, it's only a few people, these kind of claims on a daily basis. And when you're handling these kinds of claims related to this industry, you get to understand how to settle them, what the significance of them are. And therefore, you have lower settlements, lower judgments. Therefore, not having to charge the insured or the portfolio a significant amount more the next year because of a mishandled claim by the carrier. That's a big service. You're buying the claims handling. That's the product insurance carriers are offering. They're servicing of claims in the occasion that may occur.
Well, that's always sort of the layman's knock on insurance, right? I pay into this all the time, and when I need you, I'm treated like, oh no, you're actually making a claim, and the insurer kind of runs and hides or denies and this kind of thing. But in a case like this where you guys are at least more specialized, it sounds like having that understanding of the death care space is key.
Absolutely. We're trying to get our name out there and let people know that we are here. We're very new. So that's why I go into a few conferences it's interesting because I don't work directly with the cemeteries, these crematories, and funeral homes. I work with their brokers, so I'm one, arm length away from actually working with them. So it can be confusing. So I would suggest they have their brokers go to market and, find carriers like us to take a look at their risk.
So you just wrote a piece for American Cemetery and Cremation magazine that's going to be running in December issue that is about the kind of things cemeteries specifically need to look out for, trips and fall coverage, and just some of the dangers. Talk a little bit about, just for those listeners who operate a cemetery, what are just some of the big concerns that you hear about that people need to keep their eyes out, and also some of the ones that people don't always think about that can kind of bite you in the ass.
Yeah, definitely. So what we're noticing is, now that we've been doing this for how many years? 6 years plus now, triple falls, like in any industry, is the highest quantity of claims. And typically, the more acreage the cemetery is managing, the higher rate of the trip and falls. And that makes common sense. There's a lot more ground to cover. Some areas have new plots that are being filled, so they haven't been filled in maybe 50 years, so they're not really looked after or ventured too often by the staff. The more acreage, the more likely to trip and fall. The harder it is to manage and keep tabs of the entire cemetery. So, one point that would be a good idea is however they are managing their cemetery or their daily duties for their staff, is that their staff keep an eye out for any potential hazards, either it be a divot in the grass, a sinking of the grass from a recent burial, to mark it with a marker and keep moving to their agenda that day, but write it down and or mark it, either it be a crack in the sidewalk, a pothole in the parking lot, and so on and so forth. A staircase, railings, any potential hazards, a broken tree branch, a tree that looks like it's dying. If they have an agenda, mark it, note it, and keep going instead of just going to take care of your task for the day and coming back and saying, I did that. And then they can plan to fix these other issues and put it on the agenda in the future, for example. That would be one item. And another issue coming up is a lot of cemeteries and larger cemeteries are now redefining themselves not as cemeteries, as memorial parks, to welcome the public to see their beauty, to see their landscaping, their trees, what they have to offer. And they're hosting more events. And with that, they really need to be on top of the same elements and being aware and being able to handle that crowd, the walkways, the passages, and even all the land off of that.
In the fast-evolving world of funeral service, staying ahead of the curve is crucial. That's why thousands of professionals trust Funeral Service Insider for their weekly dose of industry insights. For a limited time, you can subscribe to FSI and get 1 full year of premium digital content delivered straight to your inbox every Thursday morning for just $99. Why subscribe? Get exclusive access to business growth strategies, breaking industry news, insights on end-of-life care, and in-depth reports that matter to you. But hurry, this incredible offer expires December 31st, and by subscribing today, you'll save $246 off the regular price. Don't miss out. Visit Kates-Boylston.com/holiday right now or click the link in the show notes. You can grab even more savings with 1 year of American Funeral Director or American Cemetery and Cremation for just $12 each. Once again, visit Kates-Boylston.com/holiday to secure these exclusive holiday deals before time runs out.
One thing that happened during COVID is a lot of cemeteries increased the number of visitors they had because there weren't a lot of places for people to gather or just be during that time, you recall. So since then, it's kind of been something we've been even preaching in our pages. Hey, community involvement and events, keep your cemetery in the public eye. You want to have, as cemetery usage from a burial standpoint decreases at all, you still want to have your community at least know about you. So when the time comes, they consider you a place to choose. We definitely preach that, but with that comes that fear about having events equals more people, equals more chances for people to fall down, get hurt, what have you. Is that something where cemeteries that have those type of events pay more money with that knowledge, or is it just they have to be more diligent?
I guess it goes hand in hand. It's individual, but based on the cemetery's, I guess, layout and the size of the events they're hosting and what's all involved. There's so many There's so many types of events they're hosting. Some are hosting spooky walks. Some are hosting concerts. Some are hosting whiskey tasting. I have seen so many unique events, and there's different crowds, different sizes of crowds, and different needs and uses of their premises for each. If it's a small crowd and they're walking along pathways, I would say it's safer. If it's large crowds that are going to be harder to manage, that are also venturing in the grass and the cemetery area, that I would be a lot more cautious about, and maybe have some staff directing them, or have some vendor, whatever vendors you're hiring or third parties you're hiring to keep an eye on, help people navigate the cemetery or that area, at least, keep them in. But yeah, it was a big help. I was living in New York City at the time of COVID, and yes, I was locked in, and there's not many places to go. So I think that was a great timing and opportunity for a lot of New York City cemeteries, and they did take advantage of it to open up their parks, and people were happy to go and explore for the first time. And I think it was a great success for many. Someone not in the industry would think to themselves the first time they may hear about it, oh, go hang out at so and such cemetery and watch a movie at night, or look at the stars, or go on a trolley whiskey tour. That sounds maybe weird, but it grows on you fast, and it just makes sense, honestly. And it is so gorgeous. Every time I go to a cemetery, I just say, wow, it's so gorgeous. They're typically immaculately maintained and manicured, beautiful, variation of trees, flora and fauna, like I've mentioned it. You would be surprised. And I would like to hear otherwise if someone does venture first time in a while and explore one.
I think it's true, and it gets back to the history of what cemeteries had been in the past. Greenwood, of course, in Brooklyn is one that famously was a huge tourist attraction in the early part of last century. And it was a common thing to have picnics there. And then people were like, oh, no, that's weird. But now we're kind of back in that space now that we're letting cemeteries be that kind of thing again. On the flip side, I had an article in a recent issue. When I was a kid, I lived near a cemetery. We'd wander in at night. We'd roam around in the night. It wasn't the best upkept place. And, one time, one of my sisters was witness to, I saw this as well, finding a leg that was just left out in the cemetery. Nowadays, that would be a phone call to a lawyer and a for the trauma. But as kids then, we just kind of were like, well, that was kind of weird. And we moved on. But, cemeteries have to worry about after hours visitors on some level, some of it, especially municipal cemeteries that aren't heavily staffed. So I have a couple questions for you in terms of that. How much do you think that cemeteries should invest in like security cameras? I'm surprised sometimes how little there is in terms of visual security at cemeteries.
That's a great question, actually. Yeah, obviously, I would suggest as much as possible, cemeteries, depending on their budget and availability, install as many security cameras as possible, because there are, we all know there could be some bad actors out there, and there definitely are, with the claims coming in for people tripping and falling, and for any other circumstance, it'd be good to have cameras to see what actually happened. And the challenges for these cemeteries is, if you have a 5-acre, 1-acre, 3-acre cemetery, you can cover a lot of the ground with a few cameras, depending on. But you need buildings to put the cameras on. You need electric often to run the cameras, unless you get some real long battery life circumstance. And the large cemeteries, if the trip and fall or any other incident in question occurs off far away from a building or electric, cameras just wouldn't be viable. I would say maybe if somehow they can find ways to put them in trees, maybe with some solar power. But that's a great question. So yes, the challenge is for industries with an indoor, which is most commercial industries are indoor industries, cameras are just easy. It makes sense everywhere. But for cemeteries, you're covering all this outdoor space, and it's going to be hard to have eyes on everything. That's the challenge, yeah.
And you mentioned auto fleet coverage. What's sort of different about auto fleet coverage for a cemetery? Obviously, hearses and vehicles, they're out there. Things can happen on the road.
Yes.
But do they need a different type of coverage than just your typical work vehicles?
That's a good question. The coverage we offer isn't necessarily different for auto. Auto and insurance is highly regulated by the state in terms of coverage and requirements. But the types of claims that arise, I see a lot of, auto collisions in the parking lot, just little fender benders, a lot of windshields broken. Sometimes they're running into some mausoleums, so it's a lot of incidental stuff. I've even seen processions. Everyone on the road knows what a procession is in the public roads. And I have seen some auto collisions that aren't pretty, that, outside vehicles damaging or interrupting procession and causing a small pile up. The coverage itself, I would say, is not different, but the types of claims that occur that we're handling are unique to this space for sure.
I imagine, you get those processions with 50 cars and then one of them wrecks. You get 5 cars now backed into each other because people are following closely, on their way to the cemetery or wherever.
Even the public not involved in a procession, they get antsy, they don't get it, they're in a rush, they're not paying attention, they try to go around it. It does sometimes cause a bottleneck, and or if someone's on a road is in a rush, it can cause, they can, they're pressed to make a bad decision, and it can cause some issues out there.
Now, with the rise of cremation, continued rise of cremation, I should say, I see you're involved in crematory type insurance as well. But what are some of the type of things that I wouldn't think of that can happen that you guys have seen in terms of places needing to be more careful or watch out for?
Anytime I tell someone this, they are sometimes surprised if they haven't heard before, is that at times people will receive incorrect cremains of not their loved ones. And you would say, how? Why? Sometimes tags are left behind. Sometimes non-human objects are left in the cremains or behind or not cleaned up properly. And that gives a rise to searching down this claim. And there's other paperwork issues or sometimes that also give a red flag that this is not the proper cremains. So I would follow a checklist, make sure we keep tagging and identifying the person who is being cremated along the process and cleaning entirely their cremains after the process in order to, avoid these kind of circumstances. And you brought this up at the beginning, actually, a little bit about something you ran into.
Well, yeah, we had a webinar yesterday, and a gentleman named Larry Stewart is one of the most knowledgeable cremation-minded folks out there, and he has Raven Plume Consulting as his company. But he was talking about has been called often as a expert witness for cases like that, where a crematory is being sued, a funeral home is being sued for just that kind of thing. So there are places now that are offering, better, more modernized chain of custody stuff. A place called Halcyon. This is one example, where you could look and find where the remains were at any stage from the hours at which the deceased was claimed. So how important is that to modernize?
It sounds amazing to me. That is, I would say, every crematory should be on top of that. And I, as the carrier, would love to hear that from the insured that they are in that process or have hired or following that system. It would certainly give me some more peace of mind when underwriting that account.
Yeah, because Larry said, there've been cases where you get an easier settlement, let's say, because you can show the paper and say, well, here's what we did. So, because often people will make the claim that it's not their remains, and that's hard to prove. It's hard to prove that negative, right? So, if you can at least show that chain of custody, it's not what he called like a sticky note. You talk about tags on bodies, the old school way of doing it, and just put a note on it and hope that it arrives or whatever. But something like that, I think, could be really go hand in hand with sort of what you're preaching?
Any industry should keep up with technology and try to be better. And it's for their own sake, take ownership of it and try to do the best you can, Is your insurance element, is your, backup plan or, share of risk so you can focus on what you're best at.
I think in an ideal world, that is what insurance is supposed to be all about, sort of lifting that burden or making you feel safe in that regard. And so I just want to ask you on a personal note, I know like you got into insurance through First Accounting, I think, but then I don't know if you expected you would end up in the death care space. So I know that when we met, I think it was at the ICCFA convention in Tampa, that you said, look, I'm in a position where I'm trying to learn everything I can about the space. And how do you feel now that you've kind of set foot into death care field and space, the people that are involved and what you've learned about it so far that surprised you?
When I walked into this industry at the beginning, it was definitely, different from coming in from having nothing to do with it to walking into this industry. It's definitely something different. You say, okay, let's explore this. And, I went to, a few conferences and you sit and you listen and you to the speakers, whatever the topic is, and your mind just expands and you just see deeper of what's going on here and the professionalism, the empathy, the passion and the I guess they would say the EQ of everyone in this space is incredible. My mom passed in 2021, and it was so wonderful to be already in this space and learn so much and be surrounded by so much supportive people, and whether it be the vendors I've befriended or the insurers or people at the conferences that I've already made friends with over the years to talk to and get some help from because I was in charge of following my mom's wishes, so I don't know. It's just in America these days, and it may be worldwide depending on your culture, death of your loved ones is taboo. It's not spoken enough about with each other or in general. Now we're watching television where death is happening all the time, but we're not actually talking about it on a personal level where a lot of people are comfortable with it or know what to do once it happens. And being in this space now has just, opened up my mind to so much more that just makes me a better, well-rounded person in general, and to see clearer how to live better while we're here anyway. So I don't know if that answers your question, but, I went on a little rant, but.
I'm always fascinated by how people got involved in this industry, and it's never, to me, not interesting. Either people have been in it their whole lives, and that is interesting, or the path they took is one they never expected, and that's interesting too. And what I hope, Domenic, is that you'll keep contributing to us with some of your written pieces for American Cemetery and Cremation magazine, because I think it's really cool. I'm trying to get more in our pages of the nuts and bolts, and places need to think about ways to protect their property, and make sure they're not letting stuff slip through the cracks where people can end up hurt and then hurting their business as well. And so I hope you keep reaching out, and I wish you well with the Brownyard Group, and enjoyed our chat today immensely.
Funeral Service Insider, the podcast, is a Kates-Boylston production. This episode was written by Tom Nondorf and edited by me, Tony Russo. Please subscribe right now wherever you're listening, or follow if you're on Apple. It's a follow button. It's a little plus actually at the top of the page where you put a little check mark, and then every time we put out a show, you are notified. I do want to remind you, I made a commercial in the middle, I know, but you can subscribe to American Cemetery and Cremation for just $12 for the year in an introductory holiday special, and you can find a link to that in this week's show notes. And if you enjoyed Tom, and I know I always do, you should know that he'll be back in a couple weeks, because together we will be doing the year in review episodes. It'll probably be a double episode, looking back at the different stories that we covered and thought were important during this year. And now for the postmortem. This week, I want to address something that Tom addressed earlier in the year, which is stuff getting left behind at grave sites and how and when and the best practices for keeping your cemetery clean and maintenance able, but also not getting your families irritated. It is a very sticky situation because, some places have, a big sign of no's when you walk in the front door, none of this, none of that. Some have a please and some have nothing at all. And people just sign a understanding that after a while, graveside memorials are going to be disposed of. And there's a good way to dispose of them. There's a good time to dispose of them. And there's a good practice for dealing with it when people are upset about the way you've disposed of them. And I'm going to link that in the show notes as well, Tom's story. It will be for American Cemetery and Cremation subscribers only, but here's some good news. Even if you don't want to take out the $12 subscription, you can read the stories on our website. You can get 3 free stories to read by entering your email address. And you can see some of the great stuff Tom's doing over there. And if you are a cemeterian, it is easily worth the $12 a year. It's worth the regular subscription price as well, I think. So check that out there. And that will do it for this week on Funeral Service Insider, the podcast.